Imagine the hush of waves in the dark, a slow rhythm brushing against a wooden hull somewhere far out on a moonlit sea. You are safe in your bed, listening from the distance of centuries, while the ocean carries you gently through time. As you drift, let your breath match the roll of the water in and out, and in, again. If you enjoy quiet journeys like this, remember to let this channel keep you company on future nights. Subscribe, let the bell rest beside your name, and we'll keep sailing through calm stories together. Now, close your eyes, and let us drift into the slow world of the old seas, where the life of pirates was far from the wild adventure that stories promise. The air smells of salt and damp rope. A single lantern swings above a deck, slick with mist. Its flame trembles with every motion of the waves. Beneath it, men sleep where they can, curled beside coils of line, wrapped in rough wool blankets that smell of tar and sweat. The night sea murmurs below them, steady and endless, carrying their ship through the dark like a cradle that never stops rocking. Life aboard such a vessel is quiet in moments like this, but the quiet is not peace. It is exhaustion. Every man here has spent the day climbing, hauling, scrubbing, repairing. Their hands are raw, the skin cracked from salt and rope. When rain comes, it feels cold as knives. When sun returns, it burns through the damp, leaving them sticky and sore. They sleep because they must, not because they are comfortable. In the corner, a figure keeps watch, a young man with hair stiff from seawater. He leans on the railing and stares at the horizon. There is nothing to see, only blackness where the sky folds into the sea, but he watches all the same. The wind sighs through the rigging above him. Every sound aboard becomes part of the night's rhythm. The creak of timbers, the soft slap of water, the slow breathing of men half dreaming below deck. It is hard to imagine now, in the warmth of our time, what that world smelled like. The air was thick with tar and smoke, with the sourness of unwashed clothes, the faint sweetness of spoiled fruit. A ship was not a place of freedom, but a small, floating world, and once you were part of it, there was no easy way to leave. When morning came, the light was pale and low, filtering through a thin fog. The sea was calm, the surface moving like liquid glass. Somewhere far off, gulls cried, their voices echoing faintly through the mist. The pirates stirred one by one, their bodies stiff, their eyes heavy. A few muttered to each other. Most moved in silence, stretching limbs that ached from cramped sleep. They ate what passed for breakfast, hard biscuit and salted meat, soaked in a little water to soften the edges. It was not enough to fill them, but enough to work. The youngest among them ate slowly, saving crumbs for later, a habit learned from hunger. The oldest chewed without thought, staring out at nothing, as though every horizon looked the same to him now. Somewhere below deck, a parrot called out a broken phrase it had learned from human voices, a mixture of laughter and command, and the men smiled faintly at the sound. It was the closest thing to cheer they would have before the day's labor began again. The captain appeared last. He was not the romantic figure of tales, but a lean, quiet man with weathered eyes and a coat stiff with salt. He spoke little, his words slow and measured, like someone who had seen too much wind to waste breath. The crew respected him the way people respect the sea itself, not out of affection, but understanding that without his calm, they would be lost. Work began with the ringing of a small bell. The sound was clear but gentle, almost musical in the morning air. Sails were checked, lines tightened, barrels rolled into place. Every motion was practiced, every gesture part of a silent language shared by men who had learned to live on the same rhythm as the ocean. The ship itself groaned softly as it moved forward, cutting through the water. The hull shuddered, the ropes hissed, and the sails filled with wind. Above, the sky slowly brightened, turning from grey to a muted blue. The light caught on the edges of waves, scattering tiny flashes of silver that looked like sparks from a sleeping fire. The day stretched long and slow. There was no rush here, only endurance. The crew worked until their arms trembled, then rested, then worked again. Each task was simple in motion but endless in repetition. The same ropes, the same sails, the same sound of wood and water. Time blurred until even thought felt slow, like honey dripping from a spoon. When the sun reached its height, the heat settled heavily on the deck. The men removed their shirts to let the wind dry their skin, their backs lined with scars and sunburns. The sea glittered so brightly that it hurt to look at. Every drop of sweat turned to salt as soon as it touched the air. They drank from barrels of stale water that tasted faintly of wood and iron. Some mixed it with a small pour of rum to mask the flavor. It was not celebration, just comfort, in a world that offered little else. Beneath all this, below the deck, where light could barely reach, lay the heart of the ship, barrels stacked tight, ropes coiled neatly, hammocks swaying with the motion of the sea. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of oil and wood. Here the pirates kept what they had taken, not glittering treasure, but small things that mattered only to them: a knife with initials carved on its handle, a locket containing a scrap of faded cloth, a coin from a port they would never see again. These were not men of endless adventure. Most had fled something: debt, hunger, punishment, or the emptiness of land life. On the sea they found not freedom but survival, and they learned to live with that quiet truth. As the afternoon wore on, clouds gathered low and heavy. The color of the water deepened to gray-green. The wind shifted. The men looked up instinctively, reading the change in the sky the way others might read a prayer. Rain would come soon. The first drops were soft and sparse, barely enough to cool the skin. Then the wind strengthened, and the sea began to move. The ship tilted slightly, its timbers protesting with a low moan. The crew moved quickly, pulling ropes, securing barrels, lowering the top sails. There was no shouting. Every man knew what to do. Their movements were steady, almost graceful, the choreography of survival. When the rain arrived, it came in long, slanting sheets, washing salt from the deck and soaking the men within minutes. The sound was overwhelming at first, thousands of drops striking wood, canvas, and skin, but then it settled into rhythm, steady as breath. The pirates worked through it without complaint. Rain, after all, meant fresh water to collect and store. In the brief calm after the storm, the world seemed to hold its breath. The air was cool, the light dim. Steam rose from the wet deck. One of the men began humming a tune, low and wordless, and others joined softly until the ship itself seemed to hum along. The melody was old, carried from many lands, a song that had no name but always returned in moments like this. By evening, the sky cleared again, painted in shades of copper and violet. The sea glowed under the fading light, each wave catching fire before melting back into shadow. The captain stood at the helm, watching the horizon. His face was calm, almost tender, as if he saw something there that no one else could. Not land, not promise, just the endless quiet that came at the end of every day. Supper was simple: dried peas boiled with a bit of meat, eaten from tin bowls. The crew sat in small groups, speaking softly or not at all. Laughter was rare but not absent. Sometimes a memory or a clumsy remark brought brief smiles that disappeared as quickly as they came. When darkness fell again, lanterns were lit along the deck. The light flickered on wet wood, glinting off the metal of hooks, buttons, and blades. The ship drifted steadily, the sound of waves gentler now, the air cooler. Above, stars spread across the sky, brilliant and countless. The youngest of the crew lay back on the planks, staring upward. "Looks like home," he murmured, though he had no home to name. An older man nearby chuckled softly. "Aye," he said, "the sky is the only port that never shuts." They fell quiet again, watching the slow dance of clouds across the stars. Somewhere below, someone tuned a fiddle, a few hesitant notes, soft and wavering, then played a simple tune that echoed faintly through the wood. It was not cheerful, but it was gentle, and it carried the men toward sleep. The night deepened. The sea smoothed itself into calm ripples. The lanterns swayed less now, their flames steady. The captain remained awake, leaning against the wheel, listening to the slow rhythm around him, wind, rope, and water weaving a lullaby older than any song. He knew what awaited them: more days of hunger, more storms, more endless searching for ships that might never appear. Yet in this moment, with the stars above and the ship alive beneath his feet, there was a strange peace. For those who lived the pirate's life, there was no glory, only endurance. The world had forgotten them even as they sailed it. Their names would fade with the tides, their stories twisted into legends of gold and adventure. But the truth was quieter, softer, almost tender in its hardship. It was the sound of the sea rocking them to sleep, night after night, until they became part of it. And so the ship drifted on, through the silver-black water, beneath a sky bright with distant fires. The men slept, the ocean whispered, the world turned, patient and eternal, as another forgotten night passed in the life of those who had chosen, or been chosen by, the sea. Morning crept slowly across the sea, pale and uncertain, as if the sun itself hesitated before touching the water. The waves rolled smooth and heavy, rising and falling in long breaths. The ship rocked gently, wood murmuring beneath the weight of wind and tide. Somewhere below deck, a man coughed, a deep rasp that spoke of years breathing salt and smoke. Others stirred, stretching limbs sore from another restless night, in hammocks that swayed with every movement of the sea. It was another day of work, though the word day hardly mattered out here. Time blurred, marked not by clocks or calendars, but by the feel of the wind and the sound of the ropes. Each sunrise was simply a pause between labors. The pirates moved through their routine like men half dreaming, slow, steady, practiced. They hauled buckets of seawater to wash the deck, scrubbed the wood until it gleamed, and patched the sails that tore in the last storm. Their clothing was little more than layers of linen and wool, stiff with salt, patched so many times that the original fabric had long disappeared. Some wore pieces of uniforms once belonging to sailors they had robbed, tattered coats trimmed with gold, now dull and faded. A few still carried small decorations, an earring, a strip of ribbon tied at the wrist, a charm carved from bone, not for fashion, but memory, tokens of land they would never walk again. The youngest among them, a boy of perhaps 16, still tried to wash himself each morning, using a rag and a bowl of brine. The older men laughed softly at his effort, not unkindly, knowing he would soon stop. Out here, the sea always won. The salt lived in your skin, in your hair, in the fabric of your sleep. Food was scarce, though they had not yet reached starvation. They ate from wooden bowls, dipping hard biscuit into a thin stew made from whatever could be found or stolen. Sometimes a ship they raided carried barrels of beans or dried fruit, but more often they found mold, rot, or nothing at all. Even spoiled food was valuable. Boiled long enough, it became edible again. Hunger had a way of softening disgust, that as they ate, they spoke quietly, their voices blending with the rhythm of the ship. Conversation was never loud here. It belonged to the slow tone of the sea. They talked of ports they had seen, storms they had survived, women they remembered only through fragments of song or scent. Most of their stories began with laughter and ended in silence, fading like the wind when the sails slackened. One of the older sailors, a man named Garrick, had been at sea longer than anyone could recall. His face was lined deep as driftwood, his beard silvered by salt. He had a way of telling stories that sounded like prayers, slow, measured, always ending in a quiet smile. That morning, as the men finished their meal, he spoke again. He told of a ship that had sailed too far north, chasing a Spanish galleon heavy with gold. The storm caught them near the edge of ice, and when the clouds cleared, there was no gold, only a frozen sea, glittering like glass. They had drifted for days, he said, trapped between silence and frost, until one morning they found their sails stiff and white with ice, the ropes breaking like glass threads when touched. The men had burned their own ship's timbers to keep warm, and when rescue came weeks later, only a handful remained. Garrick's voice was calm as he spoke, as if the tale were not one of horror but inevitability. Around him, the others listened in silence. They knew better than to call such stories untrue. The ship continued onward, her sails catching a soft breeze that carried them west. The horizon glowed faintly gold, then white, then the pale blue of day. Far off, a flock of seabirds moved like a shifting cloud, their wings flashing silver as they turned. The pirates watched them, for where there were birds, there might be land or prey, but not every ship on the horizon was worth chasing. The captain, still calm and quiet as ever, studied each sighting with care. He was not a man drawn by greed alone. He knew that attacking the wrong vessel, a warship, a decoy, a ship too poor to matter, could doom them all. His eyes were sharp from years of watching horizons blur into deception. Not every glimmer means gold, he would say, almost to himself, and the crew would nod, trusting his silence more than another man's promises. By midday, the sun was high and hot again, reflecting off the sea like a mirror. The deck shimmered with light. A few of the men stripped down to their trousers, letting the salt air dry their skin. Their bodies bore the marks of a life without mercy, scars from rope burns, cuts, old wounds left to heal on their own. Yet they moved with strength, not grace, shaped by necessity rather than vanity. They laughed sometimes, though softly, and shared small games to break the sameness of the day, dice carved from bone, cards painted by hand, songs hummed between tasks. Even pirates, for all their cruelty and legend, were still men who sought small comforts. In the quiet, the sound of their laughter seemed fragile. as though it might dissolve into the sea air dot below deck. The world was darker, closer, filled with the smell of wood, smoke, and salt. The hammocks swayed with every shift of the ship, creaking faintly. Rats moved along the beams, silent as shadows, unbothered by the men. The pirates left them alone. They were part of the ship's rhythm, and sometimes they warned of leaks or spoiled food before any man noticed. Near the bow, a chest lay half hidden beneath a tarp. It was their shared prize, not treasure, but necessities. Powder, tools, cloth for mending sails, a few coins and trinkets from past raids. To anyone else, it might seem pitiful, but to them, it was life, the things that kept their world afloat. That evening, the wind shifted again. Clouds thickened at the edge of the horizon, dark and slow. The captain felt it before anyone saw it, a change in the air that only sailors knew. He stood at the wheel, watching the sky grow heavy, the light dim to an amber hue. "Storm's coming," he murmured. The crew moved without question. The sea began to rise, not violently yet, but with weight, long, heavy swells that made the ship groan. The men climbed the rigging, securing the upper sails, tightening ropes, stowing barrels. Every movement was steady, practiced, done 100 times before. They worked in silence except for the sound of the wind whispering through the ropes. When the storm finally came, it came in waves, rain slashing sideways, wind howling through every crack, the ship shuddering as though alive with fear. The pirates braced themselves against the rails, faces wet, hands blistering as they clung to ropes that burned their palms. The deck tilted sharply, throwing buckets and barrels loose, water rushing ankle-deep. Lightning split the sky in flashes of white, revealing faces pale and glistening, eyes wide but steady. Hours passed in that chaos, though it felt like days. There was no time to think, no space for fear. Each man existed only in the next breath, the next grip, the next command. The storm tested every inch of wood and bone, and when, finally, the wind began to ease, and the rain turned from roar to whisper, the men stood silent, shaking with exhaustion, staring out at the grey sea. They had survived again. The ocean had spared them. For now, the captain gave no speech. He simply nodded once, and moved to check the damage. A mast had cracked, 2 barrels lost, 1 man injured, his shoulder twisted badly. The others worked quietly, securing what they could, patching what they could not. Survival left no room for triumph. Later, as the sea calmed, they gathered what rainwater they could from the deck. The barrels filled slowly, each drop precious. The injured man lay in his hammock, muttering softly as another cleaned his wound. They had no proper medicine, only rum and cloth, but they did what they could. The boy who had once washed each morning now sat beside him, holding the lantern steady, his expression empty and still. He had stopped trying to keep clean. Days passed like this: storms, work, silence, hunger, small laughter, sleep. The routine dulled everything, even fear. Yet within that dullness there was a strange peace, a rhythm that matched the breathing of the sea itself. Sometimes they caught sight of dolphins following the ship, sleek shapes rising and vanishing in the water. The men would lean over the railing to watch, their faces soft with wonder. "Free," one whispered once, but none said it aloud again. At night, when the sky was clear, the stars shone so bright that they seemed almost close enough to touch. The men would lie on the deck after supper, letting the wind move over them. The air smelled of rope and brine, faint smoke from the galley, the sweet decay of wood. It was a scent they all carried now, the smell of the sea itself, a mark that would never wash away. The captain sometimes told stories then, not of gold or victory, but of silence, the kind that came after storms, or when the sea was so flat that sounds seemed to vanish. He spoke of the way the ocean could make a man feel smaller than thought, and yet, somehow, safe. His voice was low and steady, like the tide turning beneath the moon. The youngest sailor listened with half-closed eyes, his breathing slowing, the words drifting into dream. In those moments, the ship no longer felt like a prison, but a cradle, rocking, whispering, carrying them through the endless dark. Morning would come again, as it always did, and they would rise, as they always did, to face another day of work and wind and salt. But tonight, for a few quiet hours, they belonged not to hunger or hardship, but to the stillness that comes only after the storm, a stillness so deep that even the sea seemed to sleep. The days after the storm carried a strange quiet, a silence so deep it felt almost sacred. The sea was calm again, its surface glimmering like glass beneath the pale sun. The ship drifted gently westward, sails heavy with damp, ropes coiled neatly once more. Life returned to its slow rhythm, mending, cleaning, watching, waiting. The men moved with a kind of weary grace. Each task, though simple, had the weight of necessity. They scrubbed the decks, tended the sails, and repaired what the storm had taken. They did so without complaint, their voices low, their movements measured. Every sound, the creak of the timbers, the sigh of wind through the rigging, seemed louder in the hush that followed the fury. Between raids, time stretched endlessly. There were no clocks to count the hours, no bells to mark the passing of days. Only the sun and the moon, the tide and the wind. The pirates learned to measure their lives not by time, but by survival, by each storm endured, each ship spotted and chased. Each night that passed without hunger or pain. They had no homeland, no country that claimed them. Some had once been sailors, soldiers, or fishermen. Others, escaped prisoners or men running from debts or memories. The sea was the only master that bound them. In its vastness, they were all equal. A king's son could tie knots beside a farmer's boy, and no one would know the difference. Out here, titles meant nothing. What mattered was skill, the ability to keep the ship alive. Among the crew, there were rules, though no lawmen enforced them. They called it the code, though it was less a written charter than an unspoken understanding. Each ship had its own version shaped by its captain, its crew, its needs. On this vessel, the code was simple: share fairly, work together, and obey the sea. Plunder, when it came, was divided by agreement. The captain took only a slightly larger share, enough to command respect but not resentment. The wounded were given compensation before any man claimed silver. If a man lost an arm or leg, the crew pooled their earnings to see him cared for, as best they could. It was a crude kind of fairness, born not of kindness but survival. They knew they were all one storm away from needing the same mercy. The punishments, when needed, were swift and quiet. A man caught stealing from his fellows might lose his share for a voyage, or be cast ashore at the next landfall. There was rarely violence among them. The sea already gave enough of that. Each man had his own way of passing the long hours between labor. Some carved pieces of driftwood into small figures or charms. Others mended old clothes, whittling needles from bone, threading them with rough hemp. A few would hum songs from forgotten taverns, tunes that spoke of warmth and light, and things far away. The younger sailors listened, learning verses that no longer had meaning but still carried comfort. At night, they gathered near the galley fire, if the weather allowed. The cook, a heavy man named Rule, would ladle out a thin broth that smelled faintly of salt pork and onion. They ate slowly, letting the heat fill them, and spoke of things that no one believed would ever happen: land, peace, rest. The older men smiled at such talk, not unkindly, but with the patience of those who had once dreamed the same. Occasionally, they came upon a ship worth chasing. The chase itself was rarely fast. The wind decided everything. When they spotted a sail on the horizon, the air seemed to thicken with anticipation. They adjusted their course, studied the flags, and waited. If the other ship ran, the pirates gave chase, though often it was a slow pursuit lasting hours, even days. When they finally closed the distance, the tension broke not in shouts or gunfire, but in quiet precision. The cannons were readied, ropes coiled, weapons checked. The men moved like dancers in a ritual they had practiced 100 times. Sometimes the ships surrendered without a fight, small merchants with little to lose and less to defend. The pirates boarded in silence, taking food, water, supplies. They rarely killed, unless forced. The captain forbade waste. The dead feed no one, he would say. The men obeyed. They did not relish blood, they relished survival. Other times resistance came desperate, frantic. The sounds of such moments broke the calm like thunder. The clash of steel, the crash of musket fire, the shouts swallowed by wind. Yet even then, the violence was quick, never cruel. When it ended, they returned to silence, to the rhythm of work and wind. The sea took no sides, and neither, it seemed, fate. When the plunder was divided, the men celebrated in their own quiet way. A cup of rum passed hand to hand, a song hummed under their breath. Laughter came soft and fleeting, like foam on the waves. There was no revelry, no drunken brawl. They had learned that too much joy could summon the sea's jealousy. After such raids, the captain sometimes allowed a stop at an island, small, uninhabited, a place to mend sails and wash away the salt. They would anchor in shallow waters, the ship rocking gently as men waded ashore. The sand felt strange beneath their feet after so many months at sea. Soft and unsteady, they gathered driftwood and built small fires, cooked fish, bathed in clear water. Some slept for hours on the beach, listening to the whisper of palm leaves. Others wandered inland, searching for fruit or shade. It was a brief return to the world of land, a reminder that it still existed. Yet even then, they never strayed far from the ship. It waited just beyond the waves, dark and silent, like a living thing that might vanish if left alone. The sea was their prison and their freedom both, and none could bear to leave it for long. The captain, too, walked the beach sometimes, his boots sinking into wet sand. He would watch the horizon, hands clasped behind his back, as though listening to something beyond the sound of surf. No one disturbed him. The men respected the silence of captains, for they carried the weight of direction, of knowing where next to go when there was nowhere to go. At night, when they slept ashore, the stars seemed impossibly bright. The men lay wrapped in rough blankets, the fire flickering low. Some dreamed of home, though they no longer remembered its details. Others dreamed of nothing at all, their minds emptied by the rhythm of waves. When morning came, they returned to the ship with quiet resignation. The island would fade behind them, another memory swallowed by mist. As weeks turned to months, the ship became their entire world. Friendships formed, though few were spoken of. Two men might share a story in whispers before sleep, or trade the last piece of dried fruit from their rations. These small acts of kindness mattered more than gold. They were the only proof that even in hardship, humanity endured. Garrick, the old sailor, began teaching the boy how to read the stars. Each night they stood together on deck. The sky stretched wide above them. Garrick pointed out constellations, not with names of gods and heroes, but with the stories of sailors. "That one," he said, gesturing toward a cluster of faint lights, "is the lantern. It leads you home, if you remember where home is." The boy smiled faintly. "And if you don't?" Garrick's eyes glinted. "Then it leads you somewhere else. Sometimes that's enough." The sea carried them onward, patient and unending. They passed through stretches of calm so perfect that even the sound of the sails seemed distant. Then came sudden squalls, quick and sharp, as if the sky itself woke to remind them who held dominion. Through it all, the men endured. Their lives were measured in moments of work, of quiet, of rare beauty, the silver flash of a fish leaping at dawn, the way moonlight turned the deck to pale gold, the sound of the sea against the hull and the deep of night. To most of the world, they were villains. But out here, alone on the endless ocean, they were something simpler, survivors, bound by the same wind, the same hunger, the same fragile hope. Sometimes, when the air was still and the sky low, they could hear voices carried across the water, echoes of other ships perhaps, or tricks of the wind. The sound would drift close, then vanish, leaving behind only the creak of the timbers and the slow pulse of waves. The pirates listened, each hearing something different. To some, it was the memory of home. To others, the whisper of ghosts. To a few, it was simply the sea, speaking in the only language it knew, that long, slow song of distance and time. And so they sailed, caught forever between the world they had left behind and the one that waited ahead, where no man's map could follow. The ship moved like a shadow upon the water, steady, tireless, eternal. The sea rolled on, patient and endless, its rhythm as steady as a heartbeat. Days bled softly into nights until time itself seemed to lose its edge, becoming something fluid, a drifting current instead of a line. On the ship, life followed that current. No one rushed, no one resisted. They had learned long ago that the sea allowed no haste. The pirates moved through their quiet routines with practiced ease. Each man knew his duty, how to tie a rope blindfolded, how to balance on the rigging in a shifting wind, how to sleep through the endless groan of wood and water. These tasks gave shape to their world. Without them, the emptiness might have been too great to bear. Between chores, they found small rituals of calm. One man mended his boots with slow precision, his fingers calloused and sure. Another polished a rusted blade, not from vanity but habit, the rhythmic scraping soothing in its own way. The boy, now leaner, stronger, spent his evenings watching the horizon. The stars mirrored in his eyes. They rarely spoke of the future. Out here, the future was a dream that dissolved like mist when touched. Instead, they spoke of the sea, its moods, its colors, the way it changed without warning. They spoke of it as if it were alive, a being vast and temperamental, capable of both cruelty and compassion. It was not their enemy, not their friend, something more like a god that demanded respect, not worship. Sometimes the captain would stand at the rail, his gaze distant, his face unreadable. The others wondered what he thought in those moments. Perhaps he remembered land, or faces long gone. Perhaps he thought of nothing at all. There was a peace in not remembering too much. Memory, like hunger, could hurt if left unfed. As the weeks turned, the air grew warmer, the winds more forgiving. The sea glittered in soft shades of blue and green, clear enough that they could see the flicker of fish beneath the surface. Flying fish sometimes leaped alongside the ship, their silver bodies catching the sunlight before vanishing again. The men watched them with quiet fascination. Even after years at sea, there were still things that could stir wonder. The food grew scarcer, as it always did between ports. The ship's biscuit, once hard but edible, now carried the faint taste of mold. The dried meat, already coarse, turned to leather. They boiled it until it softened, and mixed it with whatever they could catch. Sometimes fish, sometimes seabirds that landed too close to the deck. Hunger was constant, but it was not panic. It was an old companion, one that had long ago lost its edge. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the water in pale gold, Garrick began to hum. The tune was slow and deep, a sound that seemed to come from the sea itself. The others listened, one by one, joining in with quiet voices. There were no words, only the rise and fall of melody, old and nameless. The song drifted through the air, carried away on the wind until it became part of the ocean's hum. It was in these small moments that they found something close to peace, not joy, not contentment, but a stillness that soothed the mind. The world had become simple. Each day brought the same labors, the same meals, the same horizon. In that sameness was a strange kind of safety. When rain came, it came soft and warm, a gentle curtain that washed the deck and filled the barrels. The men lifted their faces to it, laughing quietly as the drops cooled their skin. Some let the rain run over their arms and chests, washing away the salt and sweat. For a little while, it felt like the sea itself was being kind. Afterward, the air would smell new again, wet wood, fresh rope, the faint sweetness of clean sails. The boy collected some of the rainwater in a small tin cup, saving it like treasure. He offered a sip to Garrick, who smiled faintly and drank. "Best rum I've had in years," he murmured, and the others chuckled softly. At night, when the stars came out, the sea turned to ink, black and endless, reflecting the lights above. The ship became a floating island of lantern glow, drifting between two skies. The men lay on deck, staring upward, each lost in his own thoughts. Sometimes, Garrick spoke softly to the boy about the stars again. "They've watched every ship that ever sailed," he said, "every soul that ever crossed this water, and they never forget." The boy tilted his head. "Do you think they remember us?" "Maybe not our names," Garrick replied, "but the light, the fire we carry. That's what they see. They don't care for kings or beggars, only the light." The boy said nothing, only looked at the sky until his eyes blurred. There were moments when the crew could sense land before they saw it. The faint smell of soil in the air, the shift in the wind, the behavior of the birds. When that happened, the captain would order the lookout to the mast. His voice remained calm, but there was always a quiet urgency beneath it. Land meant rest, food, repair, but also risk. Sometimes, they came across small islands, untouched and wild. They would drop anchor in a shallow bay, the water green and clear, and send a few men ashore. The sand was soft, the trees heavy with fruit. The men gathered what they could, coconuts, berries, anything edible, while others hunted crabs or small pigs. The island air was thick and sweet, almost overwhelming after months of salt and wind. The pirates breathed it deeply, feeling the world tilt and slow. They swam in the shallows, the cool water like silk against their skin, washing away layers of salt and grime. They laughed more easily there, their voices echoing across the beach. One night, they built a fire. Its glow flickered against the leaves, throwing shadows that danced like spirits. They sat around it, eating what little they had cooked, speaking softly, telling stories. Garrick told one about a ship that had found a hidden bay filled with pearls the size of a man's fist. The men smiled, not because they believed him, but because the story itself was enough. The boy watched the firelight on their faces, lined, tired, yet alive. He realized that beneath the scars and sunburn, each man carried something unspoken. Not greed, not malice, but a quiet endurance. They were men the world had forgotten, yet they still laughed, still sang, still looked to the stars. The next morning they left the island. As the anchor rose, a silence settled over them again. The sea reclaimed them, wrapping its vast arms around their fragile ship. The horizon stretched endlessly, and they surrendered to it once more. There were nights when the wind died completely, leaving the ship adrift. The sails hung limp, the sea like glass. The air was heavy, unmoving. The men spoke little then. They sat in the dim light, the creak of wood their only company. The captain walked the deck slowly, his boots soft against the planks. It was in those still hours that thoughts crept in, of home, of family, of what might have been. Some whispered prayers, though none knew to whom. The boy watched Garrick tracing patterns on the wood beside him, small circles with his finger. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Marking time," Garrick said quietly. "If you don't keep track, it starts to slip away." The boy nodded, though he wasn't sure what he meant. He looked out at the horizon, where the stars met the sea. The line between them was so faint it could have been an illusion. When the wind returned, it was soft, a sigh that rippled the surface of the water. The sails filled slowly, and the ship began to move again. The men smiled faintly, their shoulders easing. The sound of motion was a comfort. The gentle slap of waves, the whisper of ropes, the deep hum of the sea beneath them. There was no destination. There never really was. They sailed not toward something, but within something, the vast breathing heart of the ocean. In time, even fear lost its shape. The storms, the hunger, the endless horizon, all became part of the same rhythm. They were not fighting the sea anymore. They were part of it, and in that surrender, strange as it was, there lived a kind of peace, quiet, endless and real. The ship drifted onward under a pale sky, the morning light soft and silvery on the waves. The air was warm now, heavy with salt, and the faint scent of tar and wood. The men moved quietly through their routines, mending ropes, checking the sails, scrubbing the deck with slow, deliberate strokes. There was no rush, no sound but the creak of the ship and the whisper of water against the hull. The sea had taught them patience. It gave nothing quickly, and took what it pleased without warning. They had long since stopped asking when the wind would change, or when they might find land. They had learned that peace could be found only in accepting what was before them, the endless sky, the steady motion, the life between hunger and calm. Garrick sat by the main, sharpening his knife with a piece of stone. The blade was old, worn thin from years of use. He didn't need it much anymore, not for battle, not for taking spoils, but the act itself was comforting. It was a reminder of control in a world that offered so little of it. The boy sat nearby, polishing a brass compass that no longer worked. The glass was cracked, the needle frozen in place, pointing nowhere. "Why keep it?" he asked softly. Garrick smiled faintly. "Because once, it worked," he said, "and once, I needed it. That's enough reason to remember it." The boy nodded, not fully understanding but feeling the weight of the words. The ship, the sea, the men, everything seemed to carry a layer of memory, thin but constant, like salt that never washed away. When night fell, it did so gently, the colors fading one by one, until only the deep blue remained. The stars appeared, quiet and sharp, their light trembling on the surface of the sea. The pirates moved slower then, their voices softer, as though they feared to wake the sleeping world around them. Some nights, Garrick told stories, not the kind of tales sung in taverns, but quiet ones, half-remembered from years past. He spoke of the first ship he'd ever seen, the way the sun had caught its sails like wings. He spoke of a captain who could read the sea like a map, who once claimed he could smell storms 3 days away. The boy listened, eyes wide, head resting on his arms. The sound of Garrick's voice, low and steady, lulled him like the motion of the waves. The story didn't need an ending. It was enough that it existed, floating between them like the light of a lantern on dark water. Sometimes, when the nights were clear and still, the captain joined them. He didn't speak often, but when he did, his words were simple and deliberate. "The sea doesn't care for names," he once said, staring into the horizon, "but it remembers shapes, the curve of a sail, the roll of a hull, the echo of a voice. That's how it keeps us, not as men, but as movements." The others listened in silence. There was something comforting in that idea, that they might never truly vanish, that the sea would carry their traces long after their bones were gone. The wind was kind that week. It carried them gently northward, past a string of low islands that glowed faintly green in the sun. They saw birds, gulls, and frigates circling above the waves, their cries thin and distant. The sight of them stirred something in the men, a soft ache. Birds meant land, meant rest, meant the faint memory of solid ground. But the captain didn't steer toward it. He kept to open water, where the world was wide and quiet. Some of the men grumbled under their breath, but only for a while. They knew better than to question him. Out here, trust wasn't a choice, it was survival. One afternoon, the boy found a piece of driftwood caught in the rigging. It was small and smooth, worn pale by the sea. He brought it to Garrick, who turned it over in his hands thoughtfully. "That's from far away," he said softly. "Maybe from a ship like ours. Maybe from a place we'll never see." The boy frowned. "Then it's lost." Garrick smiled faintly. "No," he said. "It found its way to us. Nothing's lost that the sea carries." The boy kept the driftwood after that, carving small patterns into it with his knife when the nights were quiet. Circles, lines, waves, shapes that meant nothing and everything all at once. He tied it to a piece of string and hung it near his bunk, where it would sway gently as the ship moved. The days grew slower as the wind dropped again. The heat became heavy, pressing down on them like a blanket. The sea shimmered, calm and endless, and even the waves seemed to move with reluctance. The men grew quieter still, their voices lazy and low. They dozed in the shade of the sails, dreaming of cool air and rain. The boy watched Garrick sitting at the bow, his eyes distant. "Do you ever miss land?" he asked. Garrick thought for a long moment. "Sometimes," he said finally. "But then I remembered the noise, the smell of smoke, the feel of the ground that doesn't move. And I think, maybe I belong to the sea now. Maybe I always did." The boy didn't answer. He wasn't sure if he wanted to belong to anything at all. That night, clouds gathered, tall and dark, their edges lit faintly by lightning far away. The air thickened, charged with the faint taste of metal. The men moved quickly but calmly, securing the ropes, lowering the sails. They had done it 100 times before. There was no fear, only preparation. When the storm came, it did not come with rage, but with patience. The rain began as a soft mist, then thickened into steady sheets that blurred the horizon. The thunder rolled deep and low, like a giant breathing in its sleep. The ship rocked, creaking softly. The men worked through it, bare-chested and silent, their bodies glistening with rain and sweat. The boy held tight to a rope, his knuckles white, but Garrick's voice came low and calm beside him. "Breathe with it," he said. "Don't fight, just breathe." And so he did, slow, steady, until the rhythm of the storm became part of his own heartbeat. When dawn came, the sea was calm again, its surface smooth and grey. The sun broke through the clouds in pale rays, lighting the deck with gentle warmth. The men moved slowly, tired but alive. The captain walked the ship with quiet pride, nodding to each man he passed. No one spoke of victory or survival. There was only the understanding, silent, shared, that the sea had let them live another day. In the days that followed, the world seemed softer. The light was clearer, the air cooler, the sea less cruel. They found joy in small things, the taste of clean water, the sound of laughter echoing off the wood, the sight of a bird landing on the mast. They began to tell quieter stories then, not of gold or battle, but of mornings long past, of faces they half remembered. Some spoke of mothers who sang by candlelight, others of brothers lost to time. Each voice carried the same softness, a gentle ache that was neither sorrow nor joy, but something between. The boy listened to them all, storing each story like a shell collected from the shore. He began to understand that pirates were not just thieves of gold, but gatherers of moments, stolen, borrowed, or simply found along the way. And as he lay awake some nights, listening to the sea breathing beneath him, he wondered if, in another life, they might have been something else. Sailors, farmers, dreamers. Maybe they were all the same in the end. Men carried by tides they could not control. The stars above shimmered faintly, the wind whispering through the sails like a lullaby. The world had grown impossibly still, as if holding its breath, and in that stillness, the pirates slept, not as villains or legends, but as men adrift in the slow, endless rhythm of the sea. The sea stretched out endlessly before them, a soft expanse of blue and silver that shimmered beneath the pale morning sun. The air was still, and the sails moved only with the faintest breath of wind. It was a quiet day, the kind that seemed to last forever, suspended in calm, without beginning or end. The men moved slowly through their morning tasks, their motions unhurried, almost tender. Ropes were coiled with care, wood scrubbed with gentle precision. No one spoke unless they had to. Their voices, when they came, were hushed, not out of weariness, but out of respect for the stillness around them. The boy sat near the railing, legs dangling over the side, watching the water ripple beneath him. The sea was clear today, soft shades of blue melting into one another. He could see small flashes of silver fish darting beneath the surface, moving in patterns that seemed both random and perfect. Behind him, Garrick sat cross-legged with his back to the mast, carving something from a piece of driftwood. His knife moved slowly, shaping the pale wood into a small bird. Each cut was deliberate, the sound of the blade soft and rhythmic. "What kind of bird is it?" the boy asked after a while. Garrick smiled faintly without looking up. "Doesn't matter," he said. "Maybe it's one that never existed. Maybe it's one that still dreams of flying." The boy nodded, understanding more in feeling than in words. He watched Garrick's hands, scarred, steady, patient, and thought of how many storms those hands had endured. The captain stood at the bow, his coat open, the wind moving gently through his hair. He was silent, as he often was, his eyes tracing the far line of the horizon. There was something different in him now, not weariness, but a quiet acceptance, as though he had finally made peace with the endlessness of his world. He spoke softly, more to the sea than to his crew. "There's a kind of mercy in this," he said. "To drift without a port, without a promise, to be held by something greater than yourself." No one replied. The words hung in the air like mist, and then faded into the sound of water. That afternoon, the wind picked up slightly, just enough to move the ship along. The sails filled gently, and the ropes hummed with the soft tension of motion. The men adjusted their course almost by instinct, their movements fluid, familiar, wordless. The sea glittered beneath them, endless and calm. It was a kind of beauty that hurt to look at for too long, too vast, too eternal. The boy thought of land, but found that the image had grown vague in his mind. He could no longer remember the smell of grass, or the feel of dirt beneath his feet. The sea had washed those memories smooth, like stones worn by time. In the evenings now, they spoke less, and listened more. The sound of the waves became its own language, soft, repetitive, comforting. It told them everything they needed to know. When Garrick finished the carving, he tied a small bit of string around its neck and hung it near the boy's bunk. The wooden bird swayed gently as the ship moved, casting a tiny shadow that danced across the wood. "To remind you of flight," Garrick said softly. The boy smiled. "Even out here?" "Especially out here," Garrick replied. As the days passed, the ship became quieter still. The men seemed to drift not only through the sea, but through time itself, their movements slow, their eyes far away. The world around them blurred into shades of blue and gold, until it was hard to tell where the sea ended and the sky began. Some mornings, they woke before dawn, when the world was still and grey, and the air held that faint chill that comes just before sunrise. In those moments, everything seemed to pause. Even the waves were gentle, as though waiting. The captain often stood at the helm during these hours, his face calm, his eyes soft. The boy sometimes joined him there, standing beside him in silence. Together they watched the horizon blush with the first light of day, pink and gold spreading like ink through water. "Do you think it ever ends?" the boy asked once. The captain looked at him, his expression unreadable. "The sea." The boy nodded. "No," the captain said after a long pause. "But maybe that's not what it's for. Maybe it's not meant to end." The boy thought about that for a long time. He imagined the sea as a kind of forever, vast, patient, unknowable, a place where endings didn't matter because everything was already part of something endless. That night, as the stars appeared again, bright and cold and countless, the boy lay on deck, looking upward. He tried to find the same constellations Garrick had shown him, but they seemed to shift each night, moving slightly, as if they too were adrift. Garrick joined him after a while, sitting cross-legged with a quiet sigh. "You know," he said, "some say the stars are just holes in the sky, the light of heaven shining through." The boy smiled faintly. "Do you believe that?" Garrick shrugged. "I believe it's a good thought. That's enough for me." The boy closed his eyes, listening to the soft rhythm of the water against the hull. "Do you think anyone remembers us?" he asked quietly. Garrick was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Maybe not our names, but maybe the sea does. It remembers everything that's ever touched it. Every ship, every storm, every man. Maybe that's how we live on, in the sound of the waves, in the pull of the tide. The boy didn't answer. He just let the thought drift through him, slow and deep, until it became part of the rhythm of his breathing. Days became weeks. The wind shifted, the sun softened, and the ship carried them gently onward, not toward a destination, but through the endlessness itself. The world became simple: sea, sky, wind, breath. The boy grew taller, his voice lower, his eyes steadier. Garrick's hair turned more grey than black. The captain's hands grew thin, but his posture never wavered. They had all become part of the same slow current, not fighting, not rushing, only being. Sometimes, when the moon was full, they lit a small lantern and set it at the bow. Its glow flickered softly against the dark water, a tiny light floating in a world of shadow. The boy once asked why they did it. For those who were lost, the captain said, and for us, who are still here. The boy nodded. He watched the light tremble on the waves and wondered if anyone, anywhere, might see it, and if they did, whether they'd think it was a star fallen to sea. In time, the boy stopped wondering about land altogether. The sea had become his world, its colors, its sounds, its moods. He could read the sky now, sense the wind's direction from the shape of the clouds, predict the swell of the waves before they came. He had become what Garrick once was, part of the rhythm, not apart from it. One night, long after the others had fallen asleep, he stood at the stern, watching the dark water slide away behind the ship. The sky was vast and filled with stars. The sea reflected them perfectly, so that it seemed they were sailing through the heavens themselves. In that moment, he felt something he couldn't quite name, a quiet certainty, a peace so deep it felt like it might never end. He realized that the sea, for all its hardships, had given them something rare, a life lived outside of time, a life stripped of everything except what was essential: breath, motion, silence, and each other. The horizon stretched endlessly, pale and soft in the moonlight. The world seemed to hold its breath, and as the boy, now a man, closed his eyes, he listened to the sea's eternal song, gentle and unbroken, carrying the memories of all who had lived and dreamed upon it. The ship sailed on, quiet and small against the vastness, a single heartbeat in the endless rhythm of the sea. And in that rhythm, slow, steady, eternal, they found home. The sea had grown warmer, softer in color, its surface shimmering like glass beneath the afternoon sun. The ship floated lightly, moving only with the pulse of the tide. The sound of creaking wood and the occasional flap of sail were the only signs of life in an otherwise silent world. The men had grown accustomed to the quiet. It was no longer an absence, but a companion. The boy, though no longer truly a boy, stood at the bow, leaning on the rail, his hair lifted gently by the wind. He had learned the rhythm of the ship so well that he could feel her heartbeat through the wood beneath his palms. Every shift, every breath of the sea passed through him as if he were part of it. Behind him, Garrick was humming softly, shaping another carving with his old knife. His hands moved slower these days, the lines on his face deeper, but the calm had not left him. He seemed to have accepted the slow unraveling of time, just as he had accepted every storm and every dawn before it. The captain watched from the helm, his gaze steady and far away. He rarely spoke now, but when he did, his words carried a quiet wisdom that came not from power but from years of listening to the wind, the waves, and the long silence between them. As the day faded into evening, the sky turned the color of amber and rose. The sea reflected it perfectly, so that the world seemed to glow from within. The crew moved slower, their shadows long across the deck. The air smelled faintly of salt and tar and something sweet, the scent of calm itself. When the sun sank below the horizon, a deep hush settled over everything. The stars emerged one by one, patient and bright. The lanterns on deck flickered to life, their light golden and small against the vast night. Garrick's humming became a song, one of those nameless sea tunes that had been passed down from ship to ship, always changing, always the same. The others joined in, their voices soft and low. It wasn't a song of joy or sorrow, but of simple being, a tune meant to pass the time until time itself disappeared. The boy sat near Garrick, listening. The melody wrapped around him like a blanket. The rhythm of the ship beneath him became part of the song, each groan of wood another note in the endless lullaby of the sea. When the singing faded, they sat in silence for a while. Then Garrick spoke softly. "When I was young, I thought the sea was a place you conquered, that if you were clever enough, strong enough, you could make it give you what you wanted." He smiled faintly. But I was wrong. The sea doesn't give or take, it just is, and you learn to float inside it. The boy nodded, his eyes on the horizon. Then what are we? He asked. Stories, Garrick said simply. The sea tells them, through us. The captain, standing at the wheel, heard but said nothing. He only looked upward, at the quiet stars, and let the thoughts settle like mist. That night, the wind shifted again, carrying with it a soft, steady current that rocked the ship like a cradle. The men slept deeply, their breathing slow and even. The ocean itself seemed to breathe with them, in and out, calm and eternal. In the morning, the world was grey and gentle. A thin fog clung to the surface of the water, turning everything to soft shapes and whispers. The boy could barely see the end of the ship, yet the sound of water lapping against the hull was soothing, a reminder that they were still moving. Still alive, they moved carefully through the mist. The captain's eyes were steady, his hands light on the wheel. The fog muffled everything, footsteps, voices, even the wind. It felt like sailing through a dream, where every sound was distant and slow. Garrick stood near the rail, tracing the edge of the ship with his fingertips. Feels like the world's holding its breath, he murmured. The boy nodded. Do you think there's anything out there? There's always something out there, Garrick said, his smile faint. But maybe it's better we can't see it yet. The fog lifted by afternoon, revealing a calm sea bathed in light. The air shimmered faintly, and the horizon stretched wide and endless once more. The men breathed easier, though none had been afraid. Fear had long ago been replaced by acceptance, not the kind born of defeat, but the kind born of peace. They fished a little that day, lowering thin lines into the water and waiting patiently. Sometimes they caught small silver fish that glimmered like coins in the sun. Sometimes nothing. It didn't matter. The waiting itself was enough. The quiet, the rhythm, the way the sea moved beneath them. When the catch was good, they cooked simply. Fish, hard bread, and a little salt. The smell of smoke drifted softly across the deck, mixing with the scent of the sea. The boy chewed slowly, savoring it, as though the act of eating was itself an offering to the ocean. In the evenings, they began keeping a small book, not a log of dates or destinations, but of thoughts. Each man wrote a few words, sometimes only a single line. Things they had seen, things they remembered, things they hoped the sea would keep. The boy wrote, "The sea has no walls, but it feels like home." Garrick added beneath it, "And home needs no roof when the sky never ends." The captain wrote only once, on a page near the center, "We are smaller than the waves, but louder than silence." The book stayed open on the table in the captain's quarters, its pages fluttering gently whenever the ship moved. No one guarded it. It belonged to the ship and to the sea. One evening, as the light faded into blue, Garrick took the wooden bird he had carved and held it up to the sky. "Do you think it would float?" he asked quietly. The boy hesitated. "Maybe," Garrick smiled, his eyes soft. "Then let's see." He walked to the edge of the deck and set it gently on the water. It drifted beside the ship, bobbing lightly on the waves. For a long moment, it stayed near, then slowly fell behind. Carried by the current, they watched it until it was only a shadow in the twilight, a small shape moving toward the horizon, free and unhurried. When night fell, the boy dreamed of the wooden bird. He dreamed it was flying, not over the sea, but through it, gliding just beneath the surface, wings outstretched. Following the faint light that shimmered below, he woke to the sound of rain, soft, steady, cleansing. The deck glistened, and the air smelled fresh. The sea was calm again, rippling faintly in the dim morning light. The men stood quietly in the rain, letting it fall on their faces. No one rushed for cover. It was a gift, like everything the sea offered, brief, quiet, and real. Later, when the clouds broke and the sun returned, a faint rainbow appeared, a thin arc of color barely visible against the sky. The boy smiled, pointing it out. Garrick looked up, squinting. "It's faint," he said. "Still there," the boy replied. "Aye," Garrick murmured, "just like us." The ship sailed on beneath the rainbow until it faded, leaving only the soft blue of sky and sea. Days turned 2 weeks again. The book filled slowly with words. The air grew warmer. The sea changed shades, sometimes green, sometimes grey, sometimes silver as glass. It was never the same twice. And though the men grew older, quieter, thinner, there was peace in them now, a deep, still peace that came not from wealth or glory, but from knowing that they had become part of something vast and eternal. When the wind blew through the rigging, It sounded almost like voices, soft, distant, familiar. The boy sometimes imagined it was the sea speaking back, repeating their stories in its own slow language. He liked to think that somewhere beneath the waves, the wooden bird still drifted, carried gently by the same current that carried them. The sea held all things, beginnings, endings, and everything between. And as the ship moved across its endless heart, the pirates men once feared, once forgotten, became something quieter, something lasting. Not ghosts, not legends, just echoes of the sea itself. The sea was calm again, a mirror stretching endlessly into the soft haze of dawn. The ship drifted with almost no sound, as though it too had grown tired of motion. The sails hung loose, their edges brushing lightly against the still air. The boy, though now fully a man, stood by the mainmast, a cup of water in his hand, watching the horizon where the sun was trying to rise. It was not the bright, golden fire of his youth. It was pale now, a thin light filtered through mist. But it was beautiful all the same. He felt the ship beneath him, the familiar pulse and sway that had become his heartbeat. It was strange to remember that there had been a time when he had dreamed of land, of cities, of people, of noise. Now the thought of stone streets and crowded rooms made him uneasy. The sea had claimed him entirely. Below deck, Garrick was awake, sorting through the few things he still kept: his carving knife, a small pouch of shells, and a piece of driftwood he'd been shaping for days. He moved slowly, his hands trembling, but his eyes calm. The years had softened him, not worn him away. When the boy came down, Garrick smiled faintly. Still chasing the sunrise? The boy nodded. It's quieter in the morning. Aye, Garrick said softly. The sea listens better then. He picked up the piece of driftwood and held it out. Thought I'd make another bird, he said. But this one'll stay with us. The boy smiled. To remind us of the other. To remind us we can still make things that float, Garrick said, his voice distant, gentle. They shared a quiet laugh, then sat together in the dim light of the cabin. The ship groaned softly around them, a sound that had become like an old friend's breath, steady, patient, never-ending. Up above, the captain was charting nothing. The map on his table was blank now. No ports, no islands, no destinations, just the faint grid of longitude and latitude, lines stretching into nothingness. He traced them absently with one finger, as if trying to remember what it had ever meant to follow them. There was peace in the unknowing. They had not seen another ship in months, maybe longer. Time had lost its edges. The sea gave them day and night, light and dark, all the measure they needed. By midday, the sun burned through the mist, and the water glowed a clear, deep blue. Flying fish darted near the hull, their silver bodies flashing like sparks. The boy, the man, leaned over the railing to watch them. He thought of all the creatures they had seen over the years. Whales passing in silence, dolphins racing beside the bow, even the ghostly shape of a shark once, circling in the dark water. They had once feared such things. Now they felt like neighbors. That afternoon, Garrick dozed in a patch of sunlight, his knife still in his hand. The captain sat near him, humming softly, the same low tune he had always returned to. The boy listened from the steps, eyes half closed, the music mingling with the rhythm of the waves. When the captain stopped humming, he spoke without turning his head. You ever wonder, he said quietly, what became of the ones we left behind? Garrick opened one eye. Sometimes, but I think they're still out there, somewhere, in the sound of the wind, in the rain, maybe even in the sea itself. The captain nodded. Aye, the sea keeps everything, doesn't it? The boy said nothing, but his chest tightened. He thought of faces, some he remembered clearly, others only as flashes of laughter, of anger, of light. They were all part of him now, drifting somewhere in the tide of memory. As the day stretched into dusk, a warm breeze rose. The men set the sails again, slowly, almost ceremonially. The ropes felt rough beneath their fingers, the canvas soft and worn. It had been years since they had raised them with urgency. Now, it was simply a gesture, a movement of grace, like breathing. The ship moved again, gently cutting through the soft ripples. The sound of the hull meeting the water was like a sigh. That night, the stars came out thick and brilliant, so many that the sky seemed crowded with them. The boy lay on the deck, staring upward. He thought of all the nights he had done this before, all the times the stars had been his only light, his only map. They had watched him grow from a frightened boy into something else, not quite a sailor, not quite a ghost, just a piece of the sea, shaped by its patience. He closed his eyes and listened. Somewhere below, the ship creaked in rhythm. Garrick's faint snore carried through the air. The wind was soft. The sea whispered against the wood. It was enough. Days passed in slow, uncounted rhythm. The sea changed mood again. Gentle grey mornings, silver afternoons, nights thick with fog. There were no storms now, no hunger, no fear, just the quiet endurance of existence. Sometimes the captain would tell stories, half-remembered tales from years before, when they had been reckless and young. His voice would drift across the deck, mixing with the wind, carrying old laughter like the sound of distant bells. Garrick would add to them, sometimes correcting him, sometimes embellishing. They no longer cared what was true. Truth had become a soft, shifting thing like the sea itself. One story began with a shipwreck, another with a treasure they never found. But every story ended the same way, with the sea swallowing it all, as if to remind them that every ending belonged to her. One morning, the man, found Garrick sitting quietly at the edge of the deck, staring at the horizon. The sunlight shimmered on the water, turning it into molten gold. "Do you ever think about stopping?" the boy asked softly. Garrick smiled without looking at him. "Stopping what?" "Sailing." The old man chuckled. "We're not sailing, lad. We're floating. Big difference." The boy laughed too, quietly. "Then, do you ever want to go back?" Garrick shook his head. "To what?" "Land's no place for ghosts. The sea's kinder. She remembers without judging." He lifted a small piece of driftwood from his lap, the bird he'd been carving. It was finished now, smooth and simple. He held it out. "Take it," he said. "Keep it with you." The boy hesitated. "Why?" Garrick looked at him for a long moment. "Because when you've been out here long enough, you forget where you end and the sea begins. The bird'll remind you you're still something apart, still human." The boy took it gently. The wood was warm from the sun, shaped perfectly to fit his hand. That night, Garrick didn't join them for the evening song. He stayed below deck, resting. The others sang softly without him, their voices low and steady. The wind hummed through the ropes. The sea kept its rhythm. By morning, Garrick was gone. His hammock was empty, his knife folded neatly beside it. No struggle, no sign of where he had gone, only the faintest dampness on the floorboards near the edge, as if he had stepped into the sea, and the sea had accepted him without question. The captain said nothing. The boy, now man, simply placed the carved bird near the helm, its wings facing forward. The sea was still that day, as though mourning. The water gleamed like glass. Even the wind held its breath. When night came, the stars were brighter than ever. The boy lay awake, staring upward. He thought of Garrick, of his quiet laugh, his old songs, his steady hands. He imagined him still out there, not gone, not lost, just part of the sea now, part of the calm. He whispered softly into the night, "Rest easy, old friend." The waves answered with a gentle sigh, rolling softly against the hull. And in that moment, he understood what Garrick had meant. The sea doesn't take, it keeps, it remembers. He felt no sorrow, only stillness. The same stillness that had guided him since the beginning. The same stillness that would carry him onward, through whatever seas remained. The sea moved softly, like a breath drawn and released without sound. The days were beginning to blend again, one into another, light into shadow, memory into dream. The ship carried on, slow and unhurried, its sails whispering faintly, its wood creaking with the patient voice of age. The captain sat at the stern most mornings now, wrapped in a faded coat that had once been red but was now the color of dusk. His eyes were always fixed on the horizon, not searching, not waiting, simply watching. He had learned long ago that the sea showed what it wanted, when it wanted. To look too hard was to miss its quiet gifts. The boy, no longer spent his time mending ropes, tending to the little garden of herbs that had sprouted miraculously in a barrel on deck. He liked to think the seeds had come from somewhere unknown, carried by wind or bird, settling here by fate. Their green was bright against the worn brown of the wood, a small patch of color in the endless blue. Sometimes he would water them with care, his movements slow and deliberate. The captain would watch him from the stern and smile faintly, as though he saw in that gesture something ancient, the persistence of life even, when there was nothing left to demand it. At night, they still sang, but their voices were softer now, barely more than whispers. They sang not to pass time, but to mark it, to give shape to the hours slipping by. The sea listened, as it always had, carrying their voices across the still water until they disappeared into the dark. One evening, a heavy fog rolled in, thick and white, wrapping the ship in silence. The world shrank to the creak of the rigging, the drip of condensation, the soft lap of waves against the hull. The lanterns glowed dimly, halos of amber light fading quickly into the mist. The captain stood by the helm, his hand resting on the worn wood. "Strange thing," he murmured. "You spend your life trying to see further, and in the end, it's the Naziing that feels most like peace." The man nodded quietly beside him. "Maybe the sea wants us to look inward now." The captain chuckled softly. "Aye, maybe she's tired of us looking outward all the time." They both smiled faintly, and for a while they stood in silence, letting the fog thicken around them until it felt like the ship floated not on water, but through clouds. When morning came, the mist lifted slow and gentle. The sun rose pale and silver, its light breaking through like a whisper. The sea around them was calm, endless, a perfect mirror of the sky above. It was then that the captain began writing again. Not charts or maps, those had long been set aside, but small, quiet notes in an old journal. His handwriting was rough, but his words were steady. He wrote about the color of dawn, the scent of salt, the sound of rope under tension. He wrote not to remember, but to honor. The man would sometimes watch him from a distance, curious but respectful. He never asked what the captain wrote, and the captain never offered. It was a private conversation between him and the sea. Days passed like that, silent, measured, filled with light and the faint hum of wind through sails. Sometimes dolphins appeared, gliding beside the ship, as if checking on old friends. Sometimes seabirds circled once or twice, then drifted away again into the horizon. Each moment felt like a gentle farewell, yet nothing felt truly gone. One afternoon, as the heat shimmered on the deck, the man found the captain asleep in his chair. The old journal lay open on his lap, a few words half. The man smiled and closed it gently, tucking it under the captain's arm to keep the pages from the wind. When the captain woke, he didn't speak. He simply looked at the horizon, then at the man, and nodded once, a gesture of gratitude, or perhaps understanding. Later that evening, as the sun sank low, the captain gathered the crew, what little of them remained, for one last toast. He held up a small cup of clear water, not rum, and said softly, "To the sea, to the sky, and to everything in between that made us who we were." The men raised their cups too, their eyes reflecting the orange light of dusk. No one spoke after that. The sea said enough for them all. That night was quiet beyond measure. Even the wind seemed to rest. The stars stretched out forever, so close they seemed to breathe. The man couldn't sleep, so he sat on deck, staring upward, tracing constellations with his fingers. The captain joined him after a while, lowering himself carefully beside him. "Do you remember the first time you looked at the sea?" the captain asked. The man nodded. "I thought it was too big, too wild." The captain smiled faintly. "And now I think it's just big enough." The old man chuckled quietly, his breath catching a little. "Aye, big enough for all of us." They sat like that for a long while, two figures in the starlight, listening to the soft, eternal rhythm of the waves. When dawn came again, the captain was still there, still sitting upright, but still in a different way, quiet, at peace, as though he had simply drifted from one tide to another. His cup was beside him, empty. His eyes were closed, his expression calm. The man did not cry. He only sat beside him, and waited, watching the horizon glow with morning light. The sea, as if sensing the moment, was perfectly still. He stayed there for hours, until the sun climbed high and the water sparkled like 1,000 tiny mirrors. Then he stood and moved carefully, wrapping the captain's coat around him. Tying it with a length of rope, he whispered softly, "You've earned your rest, Captain." And when he let go, the sea received him gently. No splash, no sound, just a quiet merging of one life into the larger life that had always waited. The man leaned over the railing for a long time afterward, staring at the ripples that slowly disappeared. He thought about everything they had lived through, the storms, the hunger, the endless searching. He realized none of it had ever truly been about treasure or fame. It had always been about belonging, about finding peace in motion, stillness in uncertainty. He turned then, looking at the empty deck. The ship felt different now, not lonely, but lighter. It carried him alone, but it carried him gently, as if knowing what he needed. That evening, the wind shifted again. A faint song seemed to hum through the ropes, a melody half remembered, the one the captain used to hum in the quiet hours. The man smiled and hummed along. The sea answered with its soft rhythm. Night fell, and the stars returned, brighter, Closer, familiar, he whispered to the air. Still with me, and somehow, in that vast silence, he felt it, the presence of those who had gone, the warmth of old laughter, the echo of songs long sung. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply, the salt air cool against his face. He was no longer afraid of being alone. The sea had never been empty, it had always been full of memory, of voices, of quiet, endless life. He lay down on the deck, one hand resting on the carved bird, its wooden wings smooth beneath his fingers. The ship drifted without direction, the sails catching the faintest breath of wind. The world seemed to slow even further, the stars turning lazily overhead, the waves whispering secrets older than any name. Sleep came like a tide, slow and inevitable dot, and the sea kept its promise, carrying him onward, softly, endlessly, peacefully. The ship moved as if it no longer needed to be steered. Its sails swayed and rustled lazily against the faint wind. The wood sighed with every roll of the water. The man lay still on the deck, his hand resting against the carved bird. The grain of the wood was warm from the sun, worn smooth by time. He could not tell how many days had passed since the captain's farewell. The sea gave no measure, only light and shadow. Sometimes the clouds thickened and the world dimmed. Sometimes the blue burned clear as glass. Each hour folded quietly into the next, until even the rhythm of waking and sleeping felt like the rise and fall of waves. He began to speak to the ship sometimes, softly, the way one speaks to a friend too old to need words. He thanked it for carrying them so far, for holding together through all the long years of salt and storm. He told it stories the way the captain once had, fragments of memory, small pictures of faces and laughter and rain dot, and the ship seemed to listen. Its creaks and murmurs answered in their own slow language, patient and deep dot. At dusk, he would light a lantern, hanging it by the rail. The glow spilled over the wood, over the water, turning the surface into liquid gold. He would sit there until the wick burned low, watching the shimmer slowly fade into darkness. Sometimes a fish broke the surface, leaving ripples that caught the last light and vanished again. The nights were gentler now. The air no longer bit with cold, nor pressed too heavy with humidity. It was just cool enough to breathe easily, the salt faint on the tongue. The stars looked like dust scattered over black silk. Infinite and unhurried, he began to dream more vividly. Dreams where the crew still moved across the deck, their voices low, their laughter drifting like smoke. He could hear Garrick's knife tapping against wood, the captain humming as he charted a sky that never ended. He knew they were gone, yet in the dreams they were as real as the breeze. Sometimes he woke and almost expected to see them there, but the emptiness never felt lonely. It felt like peace. One morning, he found the sea perfectly still, not a ripple, not a whisper. The horizon and the sky had blended into one pale band of silver light. It was as though the world had forgotten to breathe. He stood at the bow and looked out, and for the first time in many years, he felt no weight in his chest. There was nothing to hold, nothing to release, only the simple truth of being, of existing quietly in a vast, endless calm. He whispered to the horizon, "I think I understand now." The sound of his voice was small, but it carried. It reached the water and vanished into it, as though absorbed by something infinite and kind. He turned, walking slowly along the deck, running his fingers across the ropes. The mast, the old wood, polished by years of touch. Every surface held memory. Every nail, every knot of grain was a story. He had become part of it, the way the sea had become part of him. By midday, a soft rain began to fall, warm, gentle, like a benediction. It didn't roar or rush, just tapped faintly against the deck, a quiet rhythm that lulled him deeper into stillness. The drops merged with the salt and left thin trails that gleamed in the faint light. He lifted his face to it, eyes half closed, and let the water run down his cheeks. He thought of how the rain must fall the same way on every shore, on every forgotten grave, on every restless traveler who had ever looked out to sea. The same sky, the same patience, the same soft sound. He smiled that night. He wrote a single line in the captain's old journal. The last page had remained blank until then. He held the pen for a long time before letting the words come. They were simple, quiet, almost a whisper. All of it was worth the tide. He closed the book, set it beside the carved bird, and leaned back against the mast. The lantern beside him burned low, its flame a small, trembling heart of gold. The ship swayed gently, and somewhere below, the ocean sang, not loud enough to be called music, but rhythmic, like breathing. the same sound that had carried him through every storm and silence. He watched the stars blur slightly as his eyes grew heavy. The constellations drifted in slow arcs above him, sliding across the sky like ancient ships themselves. He could almost see faces among them, faint smiles made of light. The sea rocked him like a cradle. He thought of land for a moment, not with longing, just curiosity. He wondered if it still existed somewhere, or if the world had become only water and sky. Either way, it didn't matter. He was already home. The wind shifted slightly, carrying with it the faint scent of something green, perhaps land far away, perhaps only memory. He breathed it in and felt no urge to follow. The sea had taught him that not every call required an answer. He whispered again, barely audible, "I'm here." The stars shimmered, as if acknowledging. His eyes closed. The sound of the waves slowed, stretched, softened. The last of the lantern light faded, blending with the moonlight, until there was only one color left, a pale, endless silver. The ship floated on, steady and slow, leaving no wake behind. Time thinned. The sea breathed. The man slept. The carved bird stayed by his side, its wings open to the wind, and somewhere beyond the edge of sight, the voices of those long gone drifted softly through the air, not calling, not mourning, just existing. Forever, part of the calm, the sea held them all. It always had, and in that deep, boundless stillness, everything became one. The sky, the water, the wood, the breath. The dream carried onward forever, without haste, without end. Only peace, only the sea.